She did everything right. She built her career from nothing. She raised her daughters alone. She led her community. She served her faith. She mentored younger women and opened doors for people who had no one else in their corner. She was 50 years old, and she had survived everything life had thrown at her. And then she met him. He showed up with a uniform, a badge, a chest full of medals. He brought her dinner when she was working late. He texted her constantly just to let her know he was thinking about her. He made her feel, for the first time in a long time, like someone had chosen her. Not her money, not her connections, not what she could offer professionally. Her. She called him her cowboy. 2 years later, he would sit across from detectives and voluntarily hand them the shotgun that killed her. Less than 12 hours after her body was found inside her own family's mountain lodge, he would send an email to his military commander, not to grieve, not to make arrangements, not to call her daughters. He wrote to ask about her life insurance. This is the story of Vanessa Mintz, and once you hear what happened inside that lodge, you will never forget her name. Welcome back to True Crime Breaking. If you are new here, this channel exists for one reason and one reason only: to make sure the people who are forgotten by the news cycle are never forgotten by us. If that means something to you, hit that subscribe button right now and turn your notifications on. Like this video before we go any further, because Vanessa deserves every single view. And share this with someone tonight, because the best way to honor a victim is to make sure the world knows what happened to them. Now let us get into it. Vanessa Yvonne Mintz was born on the 22nd of June, 1957, in the mountains of western North Carolina. She was the only child of Dr. Carl Mintz and Sylvia Korn Mintz, and from the very first years of her life, the world she was born into made it absolutely clear what kind of woman she was expected to become. Her father was a Baptist preacher who served his congregation for nearly 40 years. He was not a man who preached one thing on Sunday and lived differently the rest of the week. He was consistent, principled, and deeply rooted in the belief that faith without action was not faith at all. It was performance. And Dr. Carl Mintz had no interest in performance. He wanted results. He wanted service. He wanted his daughter to understand that the measure of a life was not in what you accumulated, but in what you gave away. And Vanessa understood. From the very beginning, she understood. Her family's roots in that part of North Carolina did not stretch back 1 generation or 2. They stretched back 9. 9 generations of Mintz family presence woven into the churches, the land, the civic identity of Saluda, North Carolina. This was not a family passing through town. This was a family that was the town. Their name was in the walls of its institutions. Their fingerprints were on the history of that place in ways that could not be separated from the community itself. Growing up as the only child of that legacy meant something. It meant Vanessa grew up with a sense of responsibility that most children never develop. She was not just a kid from Saluda. She was a Mintz from Saluda, and that distinction carried weight. From an early age, her parents brought her along on Christian mission trips around the world, not as an observer, not as a passenger. Her father wanted her present, engaged, and absorbing the understanding that suffering existed far beyond the mountains she had grown up in, and that people with the ability to help had an obligation to do so. Her father later said that those early mission experiences did not just inspire Vanessa, they formed her. They became the foundation on which everything else she would ever do was built. Faith, sacrifice, and service to others were not concepts debated in the Mintz household. They were not topics for Sunday morning sermons that were then neatly folded away and forgotten by Monday. They were the operating system of that family, the way they thought, the way they made decisions, the way they moved through the world. And Vanessa absorbed every bit of it. By the time she was a young woman, those values were not external to her. They were her. She married for the first time at 18 years old, young, ambitious, and already carrying a sense of purpose that most people never find at any age. From that marriage, she had 2 daughters, Jessica Freeman and Andrea Little Gray. And even as a young wife and mother, even navigating all of the chaos and complexity that comes with building a family at that age, Vanessa kept building other things too. She was not a woman who stood still. She was not a woman who let the weight of circumstances press her into smallness. She pushed. She worked. She figured things out. Her first marriage eventually ended in divorce. The two had grown apart in the way that people sometimes do when they marry, before they fully understand who they are or who they are becoming. There was no dramatic collapse, no singular catastrophic event. It simply ran its course, and Vanessa, being the kind of woman she was, accepted that reality and moved forward. A second, brief marriage followed, and that one ended too. By 2008, Vanessa Mintz had just turned 50 years old. She had been through 2 divorces. She had raised 2 daughters. She had navigated loss and disappointment, and the particular kind of exhaustion that comes from spending decades being the strongest person in every room you walk into. She could have retreated. She could have pulled back, gotten quiet, let the world slow down around her. She did the opposite. Because professionally, Vanessa Mintz was not struggling. She was not searching. She was not rebuilding from the rubble of her personal life and hoping someone would come along to save her. She was at the peak of her professional existence, and she had gotten there entirely through her own effort. She had built a career in real estate that was, by any honest measure, remarkable. She had not climbed someone else's ladder. She had not benefited from inheritance or privilege or being handed a platform by someone with more power. She had constructed her own operation from the ground up, eventually becoming an owner and broker at RE/MAX Four Seasons. Her name, her reputation, her client base, all of it built on her terms, through her relationships, through the trust she had earned one transaction at a time. She was not an employee of somebody else's vision. She was the vision. And her ambitions did not stop at her own success. Vanessa had never been the kind of person who was satisfied with building something good for herself while the people around her struggled. That was not how she was raised. That was not who she was. In 2008, she brought the Athena Leadership Award to Henderson County. For anyone who is not familiar, the Athena Award is a national recognition program that honors women who have achieved genuine professional excellence while also actively working to lift other women into leadership positions. It is not a ceremonial trophy. It is not a participation award. It represents a philosophy, a set of values built around living authentically, building meaningful relationships, acting with courage, and giving back in ways that create real and lasting change. The people who knew Vanessa did not say that those values reminded them of her. They did not say she embodied some of them, or that she aspired to them. They said those words were written about her, that you could have handed the Athena philosophy statement to someone who had never met Vanessa Mintz, and they would have assumed it was her biography. She also mentored a young local pageant winner named Heather Waldbart, who went on to build a career as a professional dancer. Waldbart remembered Vanessa as someone who did not just offer encouragement, she offered belief. Real, specific, actionable belief. The kind that does not tell someone they can do something and then walk away. The kind that stays. That checks in. That holds the door open and waits for you to walk through. Her longtime friend Marsha Blight Cunningham described Vanessa in a way that was simple and completely true. A mover and shaker, she said. Always busy, always building something. Real estate, leadership awards, mission trips, mentoring. And because her family owned the Saluda Mountain Lodge, Vanessa was also the general manager there, running a family business that had been woven into the Mintz identity for as long as anyone could remember. Her daughters, Jessica and Andrea, described their mother with the kind of language that tells you everything about a person's character. They said she had an enormous heart. They said she was trusting, almost to a fault. They said she was endlessly forgiving, and that she believed, with genuine conviction, that with enough determination, she could figure out anything, even in areas where she had no prior experience, even when the odds were stacked against her. Vanessa Mintz believed that problems were puzzles, and that puzzles had solutions, and that the only thing standing between a person and the answer was the willingness to keep working. That quality, that open, generous, relentless trust in people and in the possibility of solutions, was the thing that made Vanessa Mintz extraordinary. It was also the thing that someone would use against her. In the early months of 2008, a man named Travis Lee McGraw walked into Vanessa's real estate office. He was 44 years old, 9 years younger than Vanessa. He was separated from his wife at the time, working through a divorce and looking for a home. He had come to Remax Four Seasons as a client. Vanessa was assigned as his agent. And on paper, on the surface, in the version of himself that Travis McGraw chose to present to the world, he looked like a dream. He had served in the Air Force Reserve. He had earned 2 Air Force Achievement Medals and an Air Force Commendation Medal. He had worked as a firefighter. He had worked as an EMT. He had served as a police officer in Fletcher, North Carolina. He wore the uniforms. He carried the credentials. He had the language and the bearing of a man who had spent his adult life in service to something larger than himself. For Vanessa Mintz, a woman raised by a preacher who taught her that service to others was the highest expression of faith a human being could offer, Travis's resume was not just impressive, it was magnetic. It spoke directly to the values she had been shaped around since childhood. It told her, without a word being spoken, that this was a man who understood something fundamental about what a life was supposed to be used for. She would not be the last person Travis McGraw fooled, but she would be the one who paid the highest price. The relationship moved fast. That was the detail Vanessa's daughters would later emphasize, not as a judgment, but as a fact. It moved fast. Travis texted constantly. He showed up at her office with treats, small gestures designed to let her know he was thinking about her. When Vanessa worked her late shifts at the Saluda Mountain Lodge, Travis would arrive with dinner. Not once, regularly, consistently. The kind of attentiveness that communicates effort, the kind that makes a person feel seen. Vanessa, who had been through 2 marriages and more than her share of lonely seasons, responded to that attention. She told her friends, more than once, that she had finally found her cowboy. That phrase, her cowboy, carried so much weight when she said it. It was not just a term of endearment. It was the expression of something she had genuinely started to believe. That after everything she had been through, after all of the rebuilding and the forward motion and the professional success that had never quite filled the particular silence in her personal life, she had found someone real. After Travis finalized his divorce, the 2 of them eloped in 2009. From the outside looking in, everything appeared golden. Vanessa had her career, she had the lodge, she had her daughters, she had her faith and her community, and her decades of built relationships. And now she had a partner, someone who would be there when the last client had gone home, and the last email was sent, and the lights were out. Her daughter Jessica would later describe those early days by saying, Travis became Vanessa's running partner. The word choice is specific and meaningful. Not just her husband, her partner, someone who ran alongside her through life, rather than waiting for her to stop and attend to him. But there were things Travis McGraw was hiding. Things Vanessa could not have known, because the version of Travis she had been introduced to was not the full picture. It was a construction, a performance. The uniform and the medals and the dinner deliveries and the constant texts were not the whole truth of who Travis Lee McGraw was. They were the parts he had chosen to show her. And Vanessa, with her enormous heart and her inherited belief in the fundamental goodness of people and her trust that stretched almost to a fault, had no reason to look beneath the surface. Not yet. If you are still watching at this point, drop a comment right now with the words, "I am still here." Let us see who is truly following this story, because what comes next is the part that will stay with you long after this video ends. The years that followed the elopement would reveal, slowly and then all at once, the distance between who Travis McGraw presented himself to be and who he actually was. People who came to know the couple in those years began to notice things. Small things at first. The kind of details that feel uncomfortable to name because each one individually could have an innocent explanation, but that accumulate, over time, into a pattern that is harder and harder to dismiss. Travis was attentive, but there were moments when that attentiveness tilted into something else. Into control, into monitoring, into the kind of closeness that looks like devotion from certain angles and looks like surveillance from others. Vanessa was a woman who had built her entire career on relationships and reputation. She was known to hundreds of people in her community. She had a social world, a professional network, a church life, a family. Travis, as the months and years went on, seemed increasingly invested in becoming the center of all of it, in being present in every space she occupied, in making himself indispensable. Her daughters noticed. They would later describe a shifting dynamic in the household. The warmth of those early days, the running partner energy that Jessica had described, gave way to something less easy to characterize. Travis was still attentive, still present, but the texture of that presence had changed. Vanessa, for her part, loved him. There is no version of this story that erases or diminishes that. She loved Travis McGraw. She had chosen him, publicly and privately. She had introduced him to her daughters, to her community, to the world she had spent 50 years constructing. She had called him her cowboy, and she had meant it. And love, real love, does not evaporate the moment the first uncomfortable thing appears. It hangs on. It gives benefit of the doubt. It tells itself a story about the person it has invested in, and it protects that story for as long as it possibly can. Vanessa's trust, that quality her daughters had always described as one of her defining characteristics, was not a weakness. It was who she was. It was inseparable from her enormous heart, from her belief in people, from the faith that had been instilled in her before she was old enough to question it. But in the context of Travis McGraw, that trust would become the thing that left her most vulnerable. The Saluda Mountain Lodge remained central to Vanessa's life throughout this period. As the general manager, she was deeply involved in its daily operations. The lodge was not just a business. It was a piece of her family's identity, a physical structure that carried 9 generations of Mint's history inside its walls. Vanessa felt the weight of that responsibility keenly, and she took it seriously. She was there often. She knew every inch of the property. She knew the guests, the rhythms of the business, the way the mountain light fell across the building in the early morning. The lodge was, in many ways, the most intimate expression of who Vanessa was. It was the place where her family's legacy and her own professional capacity met, where she could honor the past while building the present. She was never more herself than when she was managing that place. It would also be where she was killed. The details of what prosecutors say happened inside the Saluda Mountain Lodge are not complicated. In their theory of the case, Travis McGraw shot Vanessa twice, 2 shots, inside a place she loved, that her family had loved for generations, that had been a symbol of everything the Mint's name stood for in that community. 2 shots fired at a woman who had spent her entire life in service to others, who had trusted a man she believed in, who had given him access to her world, her heart, and her legacy. Prosecutors say that after the shooting, Travis staged the scene. He arranged it to look like a robbery, a crime of opportunity, an intruder who had come to take what they could find and encountered Vanessa and panicked. The kind of story that, if it holds, points investigators in every direction except toward the husband. The kind of story that is designed to redirect, delay, and ultimately protect the person who built it. The details of the staging, the specific elements Travis allegedly arranged and disturbed and repositioned to tell the story he needed investigators to believe, would become a significant part of the prosecution's case. Because staging a crime scene is not something you do in a moment of panic. It is something you do with intent. It requires thought. It requires the ability to suppress whatever emotion might otherwise be consuming you in the moments after taking a human life, and to think clearly, methodically, and strategically about what story the physical evidence needs to tell. Travis McGraw, according to prosecutors, was capable of that. What he may not have anticipated, or what he may have been simply too arrogant to care about, was everything that came next. The investigation that followed Vanessa's death was shaped by a series of moments, each one more revealing than the last. Investigators came to Travis McGraw. They asked questions. They collected evidence. And Travis, in what would become one of the most discussed details of this entire case, voluntarily handed over the shotgun. He sat across from detectives and gave them the weapon. Whether he believed that act of apparent cooperation would make him look innocent, whether it was the move of a man so confident in the staging of the scene that he thought the gun itself held no danger for him, or whether it reflected something more psychological, a need to be involved, to be present in the investigation, to watch it unfold from close range, no one can say for certain except Travis McGraw himself. But the investigators did not close the case and walk away. They kept working, they kept pulling threads, and what they found, woven through the hours immediately following Vanessa's death, was a pattern of behavior that would prove far more damaging to Travis McGraw than any single piece of physical evidence. Less than 12 hours after Vanessa's body was discovered, Travis sent an email to his military commander, not to arrange the notification of family members, not to handle the immediate logistics that follow a sudden and violent death, not to sit in grief or shock or the paralysis that any person who has just lost their spouse in an act of violence might reasonably experience. He wrote to ask about her life insurance. 12 hours, or fewer. That detail traveled. It moved through the investigators, through the legal system, through the community that had known Vanessa Mintz for decades, through the people who had watched her build RE/MAX 4 Seasons and bring the Athena Award to Henderson County and mentor young women and run the family lodge and make mission trips around the world in the name of a faith that demanded action. The people who loved Vanessa heard about that email and understood something that can be difficult to articulate, but that settles into the body with a particular kind of cold weight. They understood that whatever Travis McGraw had felt for Vanessa Mintz, whatever version of love he had performed across those 2 years of courtship and those years of marriage, it had not been what she believed it was. It had been something else, something that could be converted, in the hours immediately following her death, into a practical question about financial assets. Her cowboy, her running partner, the man who had showed up with dinner at the lodge when she was working late, who had texted her constantly in those early days, who had earned medals and worn the uniform of a man who served something beyond himself. That man had emailed his military commander about her life insurance before the sun had fully risen on the day after Vanessa's body was found. The community response to Vanessa's death was profound and immediate. Saluda is not a large town. It is the kind of place where people know each other's names and histories, where a family that has been present for 9 generations is genuinely interwoven into the identity of the place itself. The Mintz name carried meaning in that community that could not be separated from what the family had contributed across nearly 2 centuries. When Vanessa died, the loss was not abstract. It was personal. It was felt in churches and real estate offices and community organizations, and among the people who had benefited, directly and specifically, from Vanessa's generosity and mentorship and professional excellence. Marsha Blight Cunningham, who had known Vanessa for years and had described her as a mover and shaker, struggled to find language equal to the loss. The woman she was describing, the woman who was always busy, always building something, always moving from real estate to the lodge, to mission work to mentoring, without ever seeming depleted, was gone. Not from illness or age or some accident of fate that carries with it the rough comfort of randomness. She was gone because someone had decided she should be. Heather Waldbart, the young pageant winner Vanessa had mentored, who had gone on to build a professional dancing career with Vanessa's encouragement in her corner, absorbed the news the way many of the people Vanessa had mentored did, with the particular grief that comes from losing someone who believed in you before you were able to fully believe in yourself. Vanessa had been, for Waldbart, the person who held open the door of possibility, and now she was not there. Jessica Freeman and Andrea Little Gray, Vanessa's daughters, carried a grief that went beyond what words in a courtroom, or a news report, or a true crime script can fully hold. Their mother had been, as they described her, someone with an enormous heart, trusting almost to a fault, endlessly forgiving. She had given Travis McGraw access to the most sacred parts of her world, her daughters, her family legacy, her mountain lodge, her faith community. She had stood in front of the people she loved most and said, "This is my person. This is my cowboy," and she had believed it. The daughters would face something in the aftermath of their mother's murder that is almost unbearably complicated. They had to hold 2 things simultaneously: the grief of losing their mother, and the particular violation of knowing that the man their mother had loved, the man they had been asked to welcome into the family, the man who had brought Vanessa dinner at the lodge and texted her constantly in those early days, that man was the reason she was gone. That kind of grief does not resolve. It does not move through stages and arrive somewhere clean. It persists. It shows up in quiet moments and loud ones. It is carried in the body long after the legal process has concluded, long after the sentencing, long after the news has moved on to the next story. The legal case against Travis McGraw was built on multiple layers of evidence. The physical evidence from the scene, the staged robbery that investigators say did not hold up under scrutiny, the voluntarily surrendered shotgun, the timeline of his behavior in the hours immediately following the discovery of Vanessa's body, and the email, always the email. Prosecutors presented a portrait of Travis McGraw that was fundamentally at odds with the man Vanessa had believed she was marrying. The medals, the badges, the service record, all of it real, all of it part of his biography, had been deployed, prosecutors argued, not as expressions of genuine character, but as credentials, as costume, as the performance of a certain kind of man that a certain kind of woman, a woman raised on the values of service and sacrifice, would find irresistible. The courtroom testimony that emerged from the investigation revealed a man who had calculated, who had assessed Vanessa's world, her real estate business, the Saluda Mountain Lodge, the life insurance policy, the assets accumulated across 50 years of building, and had made a decision about what he wanted from it. The staged robbery, prosecutors argued, was the most revealing element of all, not because it was sophisticated, it was not, but because of what it required Travis to do in the moments after Vanessa's death. It required him to think, to plan, to move through the space where his wife had just been shot, and arrange the evidence to tell a different story. That capacity, the ability to shift from whatever emotional state preceded the shooting into cold, practical, scene management mode, said something about Travis McGraw that no uniform or medal could contradict. The defense, for its part, worked to challenge the prosecution's interpretation of the evidence. They pointed to the voluntary surrender of the shotgun as evidence of a man with nothing to hide. They challenged the weight being placed on the insurance email, arguing that people in shock respond to crisis in ways that can look, from the outside, deeply inappropriate without reflecting any actual guilt. They asked the jury to consider whether the timeline being presented was really as damning as prosecutors claimed, or whether it was being framed in ways designed to provoke an emotional reaction rather than a logical one. But the evidence was what it was. The staging was what it was. The email was what it was. Travis McGraw was convicted. He was sentenced for the murder of Vanessa Yvonne Mintz, the woman he had courted with dinner deliveries and constant texts, the woman who had called him her cowboy, the woman who had spent her entire life building things and lifting people, and believing that faith meant showing up for others, no matter what. The conviction did not undo any of it. It did not bring Vanessa back. It did not give her daughters their mother back, or give the Saluda community back the woman whose name had been woven into its identity. Convictions do not restore. They only account. They are the formal acknowledgement, in the language of law, that a wrong was committed and that a person is responsible for it. For Jessica Freeman and Andrea Little Gray, the conviction was a kind of answer. Not the answer they wanted, because the answer they wanted was a mother alive and present and still building things in the mountains of western North Carolina, but an answer nonetheless. A name attached to the act, a sentence attached to the name. For Heather Waldbart and Marsha Blight Cunningham and the dozens of other people whose lives had been touched by Vanessa Mintz, the mentees and the community members and the clients and the colleagues and the people who had watched her bring the Athena Award to Henderson County and run her real estate business and manage the family lodge with the particular combination of competence and heart that made Vanessa who she was. The conviction was closure of a limited and imperfect kind. It confirmed what they already knew, that the woman they had loved and admired was gone, not because of randomness or illness or accident. She was gone because someone had chosen to take her. There is something that gets lost when we tell stories like this one. When we focus, as we must, on the crime and the investigation, and the courtroom and the conviction, the person at the center of the story can get reduced to the circumstances of her death rather than the fullness of her life. Vanessa Mintz was not a victim who happened to be notable. She was a life that happened to be ended violently. She was the only child of a Baptist preacher who taught her that faith meant action. She was the girl who went on mission trips around the world before she was old enough to understand all of what she was seeing, and who came back from each one with a deeper understanding of her own responsibility to the people around her. She was the young mother who built a career while raising two daughters, and who did not once allow the difficulties of her personal life to become an excuse for smallness. She was the broker who built Remax Four Seasons on her own name and her own reputation. She was the woman who brought a National Leadership Award to Henderson County and who mentored the people who came after her with the genuine, specific, actionable belief that makes real differences in real lives. She was the general manager of a mountain lodge that her family had owned for generations, carrying in that role the weight of 9 generations of Mint's history in the mountains of western North Carolina. She was the woman her daughters described as having an enormous heart, trusting almost to a fault, endlessly forgiving, someone who believed in solutions because she had always been the person building them. She was the woman who called a man her cowboy and meant it, who let someone into the most sacred spaces of her life because she believed in people, who trusted because that trust was inseparable from the faith that had shaped everything she was. She was 50 years old when she died. 50 years old, which in the context of a life like Vanessa's, felt not like the end of something, but like the middle of it. She had so much more to build, so many more doors to hold open, so many more people whose lives would have been different because she was in them. That is the person Travis McGraw took away. Not an obstacle, not an asset to be liquidated. A person, a life. 50 years of work and faith and service and love, concentrated in a woman who had earned every bit of what she had built. And he took her in the place that meant the most to her family, in the lodge where 9 generations of Mint's history lived in the walls. He staged a robbery in the most intimate space her family had, and then he sat across from detectives and handed them the shotgun. And then, before the next sunrise, he wrote an email asking about the money. That is who Travis Lee McGraw turned out to be. Not the cowboy Vanessa believed in. Not the man with medals and a badge who showed up with dinner and texted constantly because he could not stop thinking about her. Not the running partner her daughter described. He was the man behind that performance. The man who had looked at everything Vanessa Mintz had built and decided he wanted to take it. He is in prison now. And Vanessa Mintz, born in the mountains of western North Carolina, raised on faith and service and the belief that a life is measured by what it gives away, deserves to be remembered as exactly who she was, not just as a victim. As a builder, a leader, a mentor, a mother, a woman who loved too generously and trusted too completely, and who spent every year of her life making the world around her better than she found it. That is the woman True Crime Breaking is here to remember. Her name was Vanessa, and she deserved better than every single thing that was done to her. If this story moved you, if Vanessa's life meant something to you by the end of this video, do not let this be the last person who hears about it. Share this video tonight, send it to someone, post it somewhere. That is how True Crime Breaking grows, and that is how victims like Vanessa stop being forgotten. Subscribe to this channel and hit the bell so you never miss a case. Because every week on True Crime Breaking, we come back. We pull out the file, we say the name, and we make sure the dark does not get the last word. The night is always watching. We will see you on the next case.